All right, so let me take you back to 1972 in Merced, California, a small, quiet town where kids played in the streets until dusk. And the worst thing people worried about was running out of lemonade on a hot day. It was the kind of place where nothing bad ever seemed to happen, until it did. Meet Steven Stayner, a bright-eyed 7-year-old with a love for adventure and that classic 70s charm. His life was normal: school, family, friends. Just a regular kid living his best childhood. But one day, everything changed. December 4th, 1972, started like any other day for Steven. He went to school, likely daydreaming about cartoons or what snack awaited him at home. But on his way back, as he walked along a familiar road, a man approached him. This man, Kenneth Parnell, wasn't just a stranger. He was a predator with a plan. Parnell, along with an accomplice named Edward Murphy, stopped Steven and asked if his parents would be interested in donating to a church. Innocent enough, right? Except it was a lie. Steven, being the polite kid he was, got into Parnell's car under the impression he'd be driven home after a quick chat. Spoiler, that never happened. Parnell drove Steven to a remote cabin in Cathy's Valley, far from anyone who could help. And just like that, Steven's life as he knew it was ripped away. Here's where Parnell's manipulation began. Over the next few days, he convinced Steven that his parents didn't want him anymore. Imagine being 7 years old, scared and hearing that kind of lie. It was the ultimate betrayal, and it worked. Steven, now renamed Dennis, started living a life he didn't choose, under the control of a man who didn't deserve to breathe the same air. For 7 long years, Steven was held captive. Parnell, a master manipulator, even enrolled him in school, where he somehow managed to blend in. Steven's resilience is jaw-dropping. He made friends, went to class, and acted like everything was fine, all while carrying the weight of his stolen childhood. Parnell treated Steven like a possession, moving from place to place and keeping him isolated from the life he was meant to have. But Steven never forgot who he really was. Deep down, he knew the truth, even as he navigated the twisted reality Parnell forced upon him. For years, he survived, enduring the unthinkable and holding on to a spark of hope that one day, somehow, things would change. And oh, would they ever? 7 years passed. 7 years of pretending, surviving, and holding on to that faint glimmer of hope that life could somehow be normal again. By 1980, Steven was no longer the little boy who'd been taken. He was 14 now, a teenager growing up in the shadow of Kenneth Parnell's control. But then, something happened that would change everything. Parnell, as manipulative as ever, decided one son wasn't enough. Steven, now used to Parnell's unpredictable behavior, watched in horror as Parnell abducted another boy, 5-year-old Timothy White. For Steven, this was the breaking point. Seeing Timothy, so young and terrified, was like looking into a mirror from 7 years earlier. He couldn't let this boy suffer the same fate. And that's when Steven decided to act. It was a moment of extraordinary courage, the kind of bravery most people could only dream of having. With no plan, no resources, and no guarantee of success, Steven took it upon himself to save both of them. On March 1st, 1980, while Parnell was away, Steven grabbed Timothy and fled. The two boys walked for miles in the cold, Steven guiding Timothy through the darkness with nothing but determination keeping him going. He didn't know where they'd end up, but he knew they had to get far away from Parnell. After hours of wandering, they reached the town of Ukiah. Spotting a police station, Steven led Timothy inside. Imagine the scene. A teenager and a scared little boy walking into a police station, exhausted but alive. Steven calmly told the officers, "I know my first name is Steven." Those words would become the title of a famous TV miniseries based on his life. But in that moment, they were more than just a statement. They were a declaration of freedom. The police quickly unraveled the story. Timothy White was reunited with his family, and Kenneth Parnell was arrested shortly after. But for Steven, the journey wasn't over. He'd saved himself and Timothy, but now he had to figure out how to fit back into a life that had moved on without him. His family was overjoyed to have him back, but the reunion was bittersweet. His younger siblings had grown up, his older brother Carrie had become distant, and the boy they'd lost was now a teenager they barely recognized. Steven struggled to adjust. The media attention was overwhelming, and he was thrust into a spotlight he never asked for. But through it all, he remained humble and kind, refusing to let bitterness consume him. Steven's return home was the end of his captivity, but in many ways it was the start of a whole new struggle. Life after 7 years of being someone else was anything but easy. Steven was back in Merced, the town where he'd once been a carefree 7-year-old, but now he was a 14-year-old boy who had lived through unimaginable trauma. His family was thrilled to have him back, but things weren't as simple as picking up where they left off. For one, Steven had spent years being forced to grow up too fast, while his siblings had lived entirely different lives. His younger sister hardly remembered him, and his older brother Carrie, who had idolized Steven as a child, now seemed distant. Steven had to relearn how to be a son, a brother, and a teenager, all while dealing with a flood of media attention. And oh, the media. Steven's story was everywhere. He was hailed as a hero, which he absolutely was, but the constant spotlight took its toll. Every reporter wanted the scoop on the boy who saved himself and Timothy White. A television miniseries, I Know My First Name is Steven, dramatized his life, thrusting his personal story into the national consciousness. For someone who just wanted to live a normal life, the attention was overwhelming. Still, Steven did his best to move forward. He went to high school, made friends, and even started speaking publicly about child safety and abduction awareness. Despite everything he'd been through, Steven was incredibly kind and empathetic. He never let bitterness take root. Instead, he channeled his experiences into helping others, making sure no child would have to endure what he had. But life wasn't done throwing curveballs. Tragically, in 1989, Steven's life was cut short in a motorcycle accident. He was just 24 years old. His death was a devastating blow to his family, his friends, and the countless people who had been inspired by his bravery. Steven's story, however, didn't end with his passing. His legacy lived on in powerful ways. Timothy White, the boy Steven had saved, grew up to become a deputy sheriff, dedicating his life to protecting others, just as Steven had done for him. In a poignant twist, Timothy carried Steven's memory with him every day, proving that the kindness of one person can ripple across generations. Even in death, Steven Stayner's impact was profound. His story raised awareness about child abduction and inspired parents to talk to their kids about safety. Organizations dedicated to missing children cited his bravery as an example of why their work was so important. And let's not forget the poetic justice for Kenneth Parnell. After serving just a fraction of his sentence for abducting Steven and Timothy, Parnell tried to buy a young boy in 2003. Yes, you heard that right, and was promptly arrested again. This time, justice wasn't as lenient, and he died in prison, ensuring he could never harm another child. Steven Stayner wasn't just a survivor. He was a hero in every sense of the word. His courage saved a life, and his story continues to inspire people to fight for justice, protect the vulnerable, and never lose hope, even in the darkest moments. Thanks for tuning in to Talescape. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that prove real heroes don't wear capes. They walk among us, quietly changing the world.